hometown, my memories in my soul is so very pain in my heart. Ang Marawi napakaganda.
Pero tingnan mo ang nangyari ngayon. Hindi na makilala ang Marawi.
Sa ISIS ang dumaan yung lahat ng pangyayari.
A year and a half ago, Sapia Gaga and her family fled from this area. This is the first time they've been allowed to come back.
Parang makakayak ako sa sabay ko. Ito basket ko, tingnan ninyo. Nangyari. Nasira na. Napakasakit pati yung basket namin na nasira.
Kasi sa totoo lang nilalakad namin yan hanggang dito. Naglalakad, I'm walking on the road pag walang sasakyan. Tapos at sa likod nito, diyan ako nag-aaral sa yung Polytechnic College State. Tapos napakaganda talaga, napakasaya.
The Islamic city of Marawi on the island of Mindanao was the biggest trading center in the southern Philippines. A place where the locals say Muslims and Christians lived side by side in peace.
Mga tao dito, kahit malayo, nagkakawayan.
Kahit hindi magkakamag-anak yung tao kasi dito,
Magkakapatid.
nagkakaisa.
But then came the afternoon of May 23rd, 2017.
Bigla na nang nagluluto ako ng saging. Bigla na nang may umisigaw na sabi nila na alis tayo kay marami doon na ISIS.
Hundreds of militants affiliated with the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, better known as ISIS, took over large parts of Marawi. Gun battles broke out on the streets between security forces and the militants.
Tumakbo kami, hindi namin kapati nga ang mga apo ko, hindi ko nga alam. Kaya wala kaming nadala. Kahit isang damit na wala, bigla na lang kami kasi yung mga apo ko, dami-dami nila. Mga apo ko, natakot sila, puro sila nagiyakan. Ang mahalaga na nakatakas tayo kasi hindi na natin kailangan ng mga damit o ano dyan.
The Philippine military, lacking equipment and ill-trained for urban warfare, responded with airstrikes. Amid the violence, more than 300,000 civilians evacuated the city.
Kala namin ilang araw lang makakabalik kami. Mga 2 araw, kaya 3 araw o 7 araw na.
The battle lasted 5 months. Marawi is the only city in the Asia-Pacific to have been occupied by ISIS-linked fighters. During those 5 months of fighting, the eastern part, the city's economic heart, sustained the most damage. The government calls it the most affected area, or MAA. 24 districts across 260 hectares, some 7,000 buildings destroyed. More than a year after President Rodrigo Duterte declared the city liberated from the militants, the MAA still looks like this. Nature has crept in and overtaken what's left of people's homes and businesses. A devastated city, frozen in time.
Ngayon, ang hanap buhay ko ngayon, dyan ang sa banana queue, tsaka yung mga tempura. Minsan, makabinta ako ng aabot ng 1,000. Magkumpra na naman ako, minsan may deposit ako, minsan hindi naman.
This is where Sapia and her family have been living since they fled. An evacuation camp for internally displaced people set up by the government in the district of Buwadi Itoa. "667 people live in this camp. They have nowhere else to go." Sapia and her family share this 12 square meter tent. 18 adults and children in this tiny space.
Yung sitwasyon namin sa evacuation center, lalo na pagka maaraw, yung mga bata, kasi ako may maliliit akong anak, grabe yung init, kaya nakakalabas kami ng tent. Tapos pagka mag-uumaga naman yung lamig, sobra yung lamig.
Siyempre, talagang mahirap ang buhay namin, lalo na pag umuulan. Hindi kami basta-basta makakalabas dahil madulas yung mga daan, malapok, yun.
Mas nahirapan din kami dun sa pang-araw-araw namin na kinakain kasi minsan nasushort din kami kapag walang relief. Yung tulong na galing sa gobyerno, nadidili yun eh. Kaya minsan nahirapan din kami mag-adjust ng pang-araw-araw na.
The government has told the people here it will be 5 years before anyone will be allowed to move back into Marawi's most affected area. Access to the MAA remains tightly controlled. There are military checkpoints leading into it and outposts stationed throughout. People can only enter with official permission and a military escort. Philippine troops have spent more than a year securing the area. They are still removing unexploded bombs and clearing debris from the streets.
Ito pwedeng paglagyan ng mga tents.
Assistant Secretary Felix Castro heads the government's task force on Marawi's reconstruction. He says it'll take up to a year and a half to finish the initial cleanup. Public facilities will first be constructed. Only then will displaced people be allowed to start rebuilding their homes.
There are, as of now, 22 evacuation centers still being operated. We intend to close that and transfer those in the evacuation centers to temporary sites.
Hindi namin matitis kung abot pa ng 5 taon, 5 years for waiting. So very long.
We understand the frustrations being there for more than a year, but the reality is it will take time to build temporary shelters.
More than 1,000 people live in Sagon Sangan. It's the largest of the government's temporary developments. Families here live in sturdier shelters, each about 14 square meters. They say conditions are better than at the evacuation camps, but only just.
Dito po kasi sobrang hirap. Minsan po nakakakain po kami na ulam lang po namin na asin. Tapos minsan po nawala po kaming tubig. Ang relief, wala lahat. Wala yung hanap buhay namin. Kung maisip ko yung dati na buhay namin, kasi sa ngayon na parang hindi ko matanggap na ganito kami ngayon.
Before the siege, Sarah Lynn had a small shop in Marawi that sold women's clothes. Her husband did odd jobs like selling vegetables. But here, he struggles to find work because he's hearing impaired. And Sarah Lynn is now pregnant with their 4th child.
Yun na may bahay kami, sarili naming bahay, sarili naming lupa na ngayon na parang wala. Wala kaming manuka, lahat kami, walang pera, walang hanap buhay. Pinapahirapan pa nila kami. Sobrang tagal nilang gumalaw. Tulad ng wala kaming makain, parang sobrang nakaka-frustrated po talaga.
Philippine Army Captain Ron Villarosa is well aware that frustration could brew into resentment against the government.
It's not just about fighting the enemy, but it's also how to win back the community. In this kind of setting, we are not only battling people, we are also battling ideologies. So we may have killed the terrorists, but so long as the ideology is still there, so long as they have resentments, they have frustrations, then they could channel that against the government. And that's what we're trying to mitigate. As much as possible, we wouldn't like that to become a security risk.
Yan sir, yung anim na bahay na nasunog dyan.
We've been trying to provide them at least the basic needs that they have. And while we cannot promise to give them what they have before, what we can promise though is that we will be with them through hardship and we will be helping them on how to overcome those.
The people of Marawi know cleanup and rebuilding are monumental tasks. A year on, the streets are mostly passable, and the majority of unexploded bombs have been collected. But reconstruction remains just a thought.
Kabisita kami noong April 24, 2018. Nakita ko po yung bahay namin na parang nawalan po ako ng lakas. Sobra po kung parang nadagdagan po yung depression ko. Wala po kaming nakuha. Isa lang po yung nakuha namin sa bahay namin, yung upuan po. Nandiyan po sa likod namin. Yan lang po yung nakuha namin sa remembrance sa bahay namin.
Nung umalis kami dun sa Marawi, muntik na ako masira ng bait. Dahil sabi ko sa sarili ko, nasaan ako kukuha ng ipapatayo ko sa bahay ko na namatay naman ang asawa ko.
Sana po makabalik na po kami sa Marawi City kasi iba kasi yung kinalakihan mong lugar. Tulad ng dyan kami sa evacuation center. Sabi ni Duterte na balikan na namin yung mga bahay namin na ganyan na okay yun sa amin basta makabalik lang kami.
There are still so many unanswered questions about Marawi's reconstruction. Among them, who will do the rebuilding? Where will the money come from? On the outer edge of the most affected area, a government banner carries a message of hope. But for the thousands of people displaced by this conflict, the question is, how soon?